Welcome back to Good Revenue. We're here today with Jina Kim. She is a customer experience expert. Welcome, Gina. We're really excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited as well.
I love it when people have non-linear paths because they tend to be very thoughtful and interesting and come at problems from an unexpected angle. You were a banker for 10 years and got your start as a programmer. Later in your career, you ended up being employee number 4 at Carta, in addition to a whole bunch of other places. And today you're an advisor. I love that journey. How did that formative experience affect how you think about customer experience?
When you think about investment banking, there's a lot of things that you do to advise your clients, and you're always trying to be proactive because for the next deal that's going to come up, you want the client to hire you again. Carta is very similar to that investment banking world in that we're advising startups on their cap table, and if they're going through M&A or IPO, we are also there to help them. That's how I thought of it when I first started being the customer success person at Carta. It was very focused on just helping customers, and that's pretty much it. There wasn't really this emphasis on how to be more proactive and help the customers.
You helped a number of companies, I think 5 companies that ended up going public through Carta. Can you tell us a little bit about what that experience was like and what you're describing as the difference between the early Salesforce model and what customer success looks like today?
Before you can help startups with that journey going public, this is very confidential information. You have to be that trusted advisor. So the way I structured the team was everyone in the team had to be subject matter expert. What that means is you really have to know about the equity management piece and about Carta. I had this whole system where the first 30 days you have to learn this set of stuff. The next 30 days you have to learn about stock splits
Mm.
and IPO. And then the last 30 days, you need to know everything about Carta and how to do some other tasks within the Carta system. We even use learning management systems to create exams for new customer success folks. So those kind of things really helped gain that trust. A lot of people talk about how do you become a trusted advisor. For me, it was really studying and learning what you need to do. At that point, you can help the customers. And that's how we gained the trust to be part of that deal team when startups are going public. The important thing was really focusing on the customers and their behavior in the platform. So the way we started the conversation is Carta is a system where you don't have to log in every day, right? Because why would you check your cap table every day unless there's some kind of event? So when we see customers that haven't been logging in and then all of a sudden they're logging in every
Mm.
day and they're checking and they're asking questions to support team, we know something is up. So at that point, you as a customer success person go in and say, hey, is there anything that we can help you with? We noticed that you're asking all these questions. Going back to that proactive point, what is that long-term goal for that client? That's what we're trying to figure out. It's not about, hey, my cap table is not correct. Can you fix this?
What I hear in that is the structured learning environment as the foundational piece for a CS team. And then the
Mm.
other thing that's interesting is I think a lot of people talk about proactively engaging with customers, but it seemed like you were using the product insights and the data to help the customer actually solve their business problem, which yeah, makes a ton of sense. And you're right. I don't think that enough teams, even on the product side, necessarily think about it like that. They'll think about it like, oh, we should get people to log in more instead of, to your point, it's a cap table tool. So they don't need to log in more. They have
Yeah.
other things they're doing. Why do you think that companies are oblivious to some of the signals or factors that are holding back their own ability to deliver value?
Right now, we're going through a very special time where we know there's going to be more chatbots. People like love AI for productivity. We are also scared about it. On top of that, when you think about brands, they were trying to outsource all of their customer support for a long
Right.
time. That feeling has built up. And with Gen Z and millennials having more disposable income, And now they have a way to talk about their dissatisfaction with brands, right? Through social media. And so I think these are all just like culminating into just overall brand dissatisfaction. With public companies, they're just like big giants, big elephants, right? When I worked at Prudential, for example, I was literally just focusing on my own work and that's it. I had no idea how the rest of this insurance company worked until I actually went to work for an insurance tech startup. A lot of people in these big organizations feel the same way. There's some kind of communication disconnect. Have you seen that show, Undercover Boss?
No, I haven't. I've heard of it, but I haven't actually seen it.
You have to see it. It's so mind-blowing how these CEOs, they just don't know even the basics of what's going on. That's probably what's happening with big organizations. They have investors in their board to please, and their focus is on efficiency, improving revenue. And also these days, CEO salaries are just crazy, right?
Right,
And
they're astronomical. Yeah.
Elon Musk didn't
Right,
$46 billion packages or something.
Yeah,
But
even judges have questions about the pay
yeah,
packages, right?
I definitely think that they need to wake up and smell the coffee.
I think you're right when it comes to that disconnect in larger organizations. Do you think something similar is going on with mid-market or the venture-backed world? Are there some other things that you think senior leaders might be missing or that's different in the environment at a smaller company?
Founders make this mistake. First, they start with sales, and then they're like, okay, we have traction. So we have, let's say, 1 million to 2 million AR.
Mhm.
At that point, because maybe they started out as an engineer, right? They never really liked doing sales. And they're like, okay, now we have this VP of sales and the whole go-to-market team. I hired them from Salesforce, for example.
Right.
So they're just like, okay, now I'm just going to focus on the product. And then I think that these kind of disconnect happens. The company no longer becomes customer-centric. And let's say like VP of CS comes in, like me, I realize, wait a minute, I'm not getting any help from the founder. That's where things started breaking down because when the founder is not focused on the customer, everyone sees that and they'll do the same. So the product and engineering, they'll just focus on things that they want to do for the roadmap. And then the sales team, they start focusing more on the AR instead of the ICP. And then it goes back to what you were saying, everything gets dumped on customer success in the end.
In that kind of situation, what do you think CS can do? Or is it really more of a company? It's a founder, it's a CEO problem to be solved. How do you think about
Yeah.
that?
So as a VP of CS, I'm going to say definitely when you're doing that interview, you need to ask those questions, right? That's easy to check whether the founder really wants to be involved in sales and customer calls, like whether they want to be the executive sponsor, for example.
Hmm.
If you go in and then you realize, okay, I didn't ask that question, at that point, what you can do is make sure that the executive team becomes your best friends. Your focus has to be persuading them how important it is to make customers your priority. And it's going to be hard. You could do things like voice of customer. And the way I did it in the past is make the voice of customer super, super simple. It could be like 15, 20 minutes. And you just bring up maybe top 3 that you have to get fixed ASAP from your VIP customers. Those are the kind of things that you can try. But yeah, it's definitely going to be hard to break their habit. If they haven't been focusing on the customer and you coming in as a new leader and trying to get them back to being customer centric, it's going to be hard.
Do you think part of the challenge is how we design the org overall?
I don't think it's the org that's the issue. I think the fundamental issue is that the sales team has their own swim lane and we're just not collaborating together. And
Yeah.
so they have their own metrics. We have our own metrics. Whose number is right? And you need to really focus on the overall story, right? You cannot lose that. But I think there's too many articles out there and too many LinkedIn posts saying these are the KPIs that you need to keep track of. People say the words dashboard VPs.
It's interesting because I see that as an organizational design challenge, but I totally agree with you that it is also a problem of too many silos and what I would call hyper specialization. Having roles where folks for micro KPI to the exclusion of the bigger picture of does this actually benefit our company, our longer term goals, et cetera, is foolish. That's a very common model in a lot of companies, that hyper specialization. Is it possible that it's revenue or renewal rate and it's a shared KPI across, let's say, sales and CS or marketing sales and CS or even product in some
Yeah.
orgs? Have you seen any examples of that?
I think it's just case by case
Yeah.
basis. But I do think that everyone should all get together in one room and decide what's the right number. And also, I think the tools are very important because, for example, you're trying to do forecasting. The CRM, like the CS team, they haven't been using it. Maybe they were using Gainsight instead, pulling the data from Salesforce and then updating Gainsight. And then the sales team, maybe they weren't like putting all their numbers in the CRM. So you end up doing the forecast somewhere else. That's when it just becomes too messy. You just need to have that clean, simple solution. So to me, it's important to say, let's just focus on one tool. If the CRM is the source of truth, fine, this CS team might complain. However, wait, let's put everything in the CRM and start from there. And if we're going to add Gainsight to it as well, then let's just make sure that those tools are really connected together and they're updated real time. And let's start with that. The problem is we need to all be a sports team and focus on winning instead of saying, hey, we're just going to focus on just renewals. We're going to focus just on sales.
To what extent do you think that being part of a venture ecosystem fuels some of the challenges we see in CS and in go-to-market?
Yeah, you were asking about, for example, like how can sales team work with CS team better and how can we structure? Now, even if the CS team leader wanted to change that org structure, do you think the VCs will let that happen? I don't think so, because VCs already have that structure in mind. Like, how should the go-to-market org structure work, or like what KPI they want to see? Even if we were creative, we don't have that much freedom in terms of picking the things that we want to make the whole sales motion better. These founders, this might be their first time, right? Building a company. Majority of them, this is the first time. So who are they going to listen to? Little do they know that VCs have their own agenda. I remember one time I was working with a founder and they got furious because they found out that the VC just invested in their competitor as well. So this founder actually went to that VC and said, hey, what's going on? What the fuck? This founder was obviously pretty outgoing.
Direct communicator.
Exactly. And guess what the VC just
Too
said?
bad.
Just that it's part of the business. Because for that, they want to diversify their risk, right?
What's interesting, is funny about that is I find a lot of investors to be over reliant on what has worked in the past without any sort of interrogation of why that worked and whether those conditions apply now. That feels really foundational to me.
Yeah. That's probably why founders, when they are telling the go-to-market team to do something, they can't answer why. Because the VCs, they didn't say anything to the founder. They just said, do it this way.
And it's interesting you also say this because I feel like the other thing that comes up a lot for me is just the question of planning and the models and what we sign up for. This almost sounds simplistic, but obviously like you take money and you agree to targets. And yet I think that a lot of people don't understand when you take funding, you're also agreeing to a plan that the VC has basically worked out with your CFO and your CEO. Therefore, you're committed to tactics. In my experience, those tactics can quite often get in the way of achieving goals, especially in a really hard environment like right now.
SaaS has not gone through this type of wartime before. We've heard of wartime CEOs, but people have not experienced that. I think the VCs are giving this advice, cut the people, because that's the fastest way. That's the shortcut way of avoiding the down rounds, for example. And I think that, again, like people are just not looking at the fundamental problem with the product or with the culture, etc. They're just saying, okay, the VCs are saying this is the right way, therefore we're going to do it because we never dealt with it before.
I'm sure you've seen this too, but I also feel like in a lot of orgs that I've been in, when there's conflict between teams, it's because they don't have aligned incentives. It's not that everyone's a jerk, but I find that it's because marketing's being gold on this, sales is being gold on something else. CS is like coming in as the janitorial squad to pull this all together. That rarely works.
Maybe the best thing will be to have a shared comp. And I think that could help because, for example, if you're going through a renewal and you don't know why the original contract was structured in a certain way, then you got to bring that salesperson in. But if that salesperson is in the middle of a very important deal, they're not going to help you. So having that shared comp is very helpful in that way.
I really think what I call good revenue deals better than others, right? Like those customers that are worth more to us or salespeople that are able to actually help finagle renewals, not by coming in and stealing the credit from the CS person, but like you actually did the work to set up that deal correctly on the front end. That's worth more to us as the business. We should pay you more for that and the
Yeah.
whole team around it. I absolutely agree with that. And I don't like the idea of pitting the salesperson against the customer success person or against the marketer. I see no benefit to that, short or long term. And the customer really suffers in that.
To that point, I think that CS leader and sales leader, they have to be really like good friends.
Do you think we should have more hybrid roles, like say hybrid sales and CS? Because one of the organizations I worked in had that, and I thought it was incredibly successful. They were easier to work with because they saw the full life cycle of the customer, similar to marketing. It felt like we had more in common, and it was really collaborative to work towards solving problems for customers.
I think if that model fits the company, definitely, and if the founder and the VCs, they're okay with the structure, I think, yeah.
Why would an investor object to that if that helps you reach your goals? Question one. And question two is if you don't have investors, how does that change your answer? Would
Uh,
you explore it if nobody was saying you can't?
I definitely think that if the investors are okay with it, because from the investor's perspective, they might just say, why are you doing something different and taking more risk? Like things are working right now.
I would argue things aren't working right now. And I know you think that too. I'm like, it's not working right now. Acquisition costs are more expensive than they've ever been in the history of SaaS. Payback periods are 48, 60, maybe more months. I don't think it's working well. So to me, it's maybe I'm willing to try new things. I'm more of an adventurous executive. But to me, it's not like the way we're doing it now is working really well for you.
Yeah, I think you have a point. I want to do something creative. The irony is that they're VCs, but still they're very conservative. There are things that are changing, right? For example, now they have these AI SDRs. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to have these full stack salespeople. This is not my idea. I read about it. You have AEs that have AI SDRs. So they don't need SDRs anymore. So maybe we could have a hybrid role of like sales plus CS. The only issue with that is when customers smell that sales pitch coming up, they might lose that trust in you.
To be honest, I think you should get rid of SDRs in many organizations unless you have a significant volume of real demand, not content leads. I don't think it serves anyone. I get why it was part of predictable revenue 15 years ago, but I don't think it fits every organization. And it really irritates customers. Every time you talk to customers, they're just like, why am I being qualified? I'm a C-level at whatever company. Why are you asking me if I have a budget? Like,
Things are going to change for sure with this whole wartime period. I wish we would have more leeway and ways for us to become more creative. And I think I see some CEOs like changing their mind as well. I've talked to one CEO and he said all the VPs that they talked to wanted to just try everything that they had tried before. And he really didn't like that. I'm hoping more CEOs will have that mentality.
it makes sense because you should hire someone experienced because they've seen a bunch of things. It's not like they're going to be able to come in and build Salesforce for you, nor would that make any sense. Salesforce was like, that company started almost 20 years ago. Like
Yeah.
those conditions don't exist. So why would that exact model apply to you? Intuitively makes sense.
And
Right. Same with HubSpot. It's like they did some really cool stuff. There's some amazing people there, like people like Mark Roberge, who I really admire, and they have evolved. He's not out there saying we should do it the same way. I know everyone wants to pattern match because they see past success, but it doesn't seem to pan out in the data. I'm all for your adventurous CS undertaking. I really wish you a lot of luck. I think that because you have been thoughtful about it and you've had these experiences of what works and what doesn't, I suspect that will be more helpful to the companies that you are helping. What's your perspective on how teams should think about the right balance of revenue responsibility between customer success and sales?
Yeah, customer success needs to own renewal and upsell. In order to be great at renewal and upsell, you have to be that trusted advisor. To be a great trusted advisor, you have to be a great subject matter expert. So you gotta do your homework. You gotta know as much as possible about the product and the market and any other knowledge that you can possibly get. This includes actually taking some CS classes or sales classes or rev ops classes. Those things are all going to help you because all those things are impacting your work as well. We cannot just think of CS as a silo. We have to think of it more as a part of a go-to-market.
Customers, in my experience, really appreciate interacting with that CSM more than they do with sales, particularly if they've had an ongoing relationship.
I'll give you an example. At Carta, as our customers got bigger, they had to do more reporting to the IRS. So then we ended up building tax tools to help them. Now, if that CSM doesn't have that tax knowledge, would that startup, would that company actually buy it from them? They might, but they still might not be 100% confident about it. Or maybe that sales cycle might take longer. Every time a customer asks a question to a CSM and the CSM says, let me get back to you, you're losing that customer's trust.
You just mentioned that it's a bad look for the CSM to not have that information. And my default was that as a customer, if someone didn't have the answer, I wouldn't necessarily hold that against them if they came back quickly with an accurate, helpful answer. Obviously, if there was a pattern of this person doesn't know the subject matter, but how do you think about that?
I think that if it's 2 or 3 questions that they couldn't answer, I think that's reasonable. But if the customer was asking, let's say 5 or 6 and they couldn't answer, if it does become a pattern, then that becomes an issue. The real problem is that customers will never tell that CSM whether they think the CSM should have known this answer or not. So you don't know what the customer is thinking. And the fact that the trust that the customer has in that CSM may deteriorate. That part is the scary part.
That's an excellent point. That makes a lot of sense. What has been the most successful CS team or organization you've been a part of?
It's hard to say because I always feel like there's something that I can improve. I think that Carta had a great team in that we were very united. Maybe it's because a lot of the OGs, the original employees, stayed. So they started the go-to-market team, and we all together did sales and customer success, etc. So we were very tight. And then as we hire more folks, we still had that real close bond. So the other people actually saw that. Having that kind of collaboration made Carta go-to-market team really, we didn't really have problems in terms of, for example, like the onboarding to customer success handoff or sales to onboarding handoff. We did have problems, but when I actually left Carta and went to some other company, I was shocked about how these teams were not communicating.
What do you think Carta was doing differently that made them more successful?
I think it was just a number of things. I can give you an example. Onboarding was a huge pain from the get-go because everyone had their own way of keeping cap tables. Maybe they were
Sure.
using an Excel spreadsheet, maybe they were using some tool that the law firms gave them. It just took really long time to do these onboardings. And during that time, the customer would get really tired and they would ghost us. When we had these growth spurts where maybe 1 month we had 100 customers and we had to do onboarding and there was a huge backlog, the sales team stopped doing sales and decided to do onboarding for that month. The same thing with customer support or customer success. We just went and helped them out. Of course, this is not something that's scalable, and this is something that we would do maybe when less than 20 million ARR. However, I think these things actually form that culture where everyone collaborates and tries to help each other.
It sounds like the expectation is that you're going to get together and make this right by the customer.
Yeah, I think another thing I want to add is as a new VP of CS, it's important to meet with other leaders, for example, product or sales, decide, okay, who's our ICP? What's our customer journey going to look like? Because you'll be surprised how everyone has a different definition. And I noticed that from the clients that I'm helping currently.
I've seen that across every organization, whether I've been in-house or helping now. People have different definitions too.
Yeah.
And that's actually a great segue. I know one of the things that you are passionate about is that educating customers is really a winning strategy for you and for the companies that you work with.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about how you think customer success should think about this and maybe take us through some of your experiences?
I'll talk about Carta first, and then I'll talk about some other company. With Carta, we definitely saw that there's this need for education because everyone's cap table looks different. When they try to find information that can help them, it's really like everything out there, it's very generic. It's not for their specific circumstance. So they end up like going to their law firms to get help. But these law firms are very expensive. They charge $500 to $1,000 per hour. That's when we started realizing, wait a minute, education can really help our clients. And first, it wasn't very structured. When founders were asking us questions, we would answer. And we also had our general counsel in-house. And then they asked, for example, education for their employees as well. And we realized that's really valuable for our clients because they may not have that knowledge, right? Like they may not be able to help their employees with things like, okay, when is the right time to exercise? What does this stock option grant really mean? So then we started doing visits to our clients' offices for free and giving their employees education on their stock option grant. And that actually made the company look good. So even though these are the things that you can't quite say, okay, it's giving us the ROI, it did actually help us, right? Because we did go from actually when I joined, like product, we didn't make any money. It was actually literally zero. And then by the time I left, we were doing like 150 million AR. These are the kind of things where it's very qualitative and it's hard to measure, but it's definitely important.
I think it's such a great example. Thanks for sharing that.
With other startups, what I noticed is that there's definitely this sort of FOMO, right, with customers. They really want to know what other startups or what other customers are doing.
Mm.
You need to take advantage of that. The Tactics in Challenger Sales, I think that's a great book, and I think customer success teams should read books like that. The reason why this book is so interesting is because you're challenging your customers, but not in a like unfriendly way. You're telling them what to do, like being a trusted advisor by giving them the insights they cannot get from anywhere else except your company.
What I hear in that is that you're also focused on what their core problem is and how you can help them solve it. These days, you are working directly with companies as an advisor yourself. We've talked about a lot of different kinds of opportunities and challenges across CS. How are you seeing that show up in your work these days?
I'm mainly helping early stage startups, and I see the biggest thing I see is that documentation is the low priority. It's really hard to measure all the conversations happening in Slack. What percentage is about, okay, how do you do this? How do you do that? Instead of going through a documentation that might be much more thorough. This is why documentation is so important. And then again, it's going to help you become that subject matter expert as a CSM. In an early stage startup, it's going to help you with your playbook as well, because you're not going to have that solid playbook in the beginning.
It's a great point. Based on your experience, how do you recommend that people build CS infrastructure the right way?
These startups hire a junior CSM first, and then they think once they have some kind of like market fit or some sales traction, then at that point they're gonna get the CS leader. I think that's a wrong way. It might be a bit of a stretch to hire that CS leader in the beginning. When you look at it long term, it's actually much better hiring that CS leader from the get-go. Because if you hire this CSM, they're not going to have great documentation from the beginning. They're not going to go to the founder and say, hey, you need to help me. You need to be an executive sponsor for this huge client. They're not going to say that because they don't know. So you're setting that customer-centric culture with this leader.
I assume part of that is maybe avoiding bad habits. Is that fair to say? Or do you have
Yes.
other recommendations for that too?
Habits are very dangerous. It's very difficult to break it. I think the only time you can really break it is something like company gets hacked and you send out wrong emails to all your clients. At that point, maybe the founder says, okay, now I have to be more customer centric. So there has to be some kind of event like that, which you don't want. Having that great habit and then having that CS leader who can create that great habit for everybody. At Carta, we had these customer support days where everyone in the company had to do 1 day of support that month. That was great because we had actually like engineers and product team, they come in for that day, and when they didn't have a call that they had to do or solve a ticket, they literally fixed the bug that day. And it was great feeling for them. When those people actually become leaders later, they'll tell their engineers, hey, you need to be more customer centric. When they hire, they'll hire people who are more customer centric. So Carta, that was one of the things that we did. It was like, even when we were hiring engineers, we look for their emotional intelligence. And we had our Slack channel connected to Twitter or X, sorry.
You can call it Twitter here.
So when we get like this ugly tweet, then usually it should be like our customer support, customer success team that handles that. Engineers would just jump into that channel and say, hey, I'll talk to this customer. That's very unusual.
It sounds like you really empowered them.
And they were really interested to talk to customers.
It's so funny that you're making me think of one of my experiences at an early startup. I really felt like there were a lot of engineers that were starving for that customer interaction. They just didn't get it that much. And it was very energizing to them, was my
Yeah.
impression. It's cool.
Yeah. So we
Super
need
cool.
to actually motivate them.
And give them the opportunity. You almost need to see that cycle all the way through to know that some small thing you did really paid off for someone, I think is rewarding. I'm also curious, what are some of the bad habits to avoid in a CS org?
The biggest one is when you have a bad leader, they don't really understand the pain points of the CSMs. I think especially in the early stage, the product's gonna have a lot of bugs. And guess who the customer is gonna yell at? The customer success team. So if that customer success leader doesn't have emotional intelligence, they'll just say, hey, you didn't make your renewal quota this month. Or they'll always like just focus on the numbers and not address that emotional sort of health of that individual. What I'd like to do is if a CSM goes into a bad call, I tell them take a break for 30 minutes, go get coffee or whatever you need to do. Go for a walk. You don't want that negative energy to stay with you and then you get on another call. People can see it no matter how much you want to fake it. When I say things like that to my team, they're grateful because they realize I understand. When you do one-on-ones with your CSM, don't talk about work. Talk about what's going on in their life. During that 30 minutes, they'll be able to relax and be less stressed. Just talking to your boss is stressful, right? So talking about something enjoyable will make a big difference in their life. It starts with the CS leader. Once you as a CS leader becomes emotionally helpful to the CSMs, at that point, I think that the CSMs will follow that and be more helpful to their peers, customers, and sales peers as well.
What makes a great CS leader then?
For me, it's leading by example. If they're going to a really tough call, you go in with them and help them with that difficult call. That's the biggest piece, leading by example and helping them and be more of a coach. As a leader, you need to unblock things for your team members. Maybe there's that thing that the customer wants that the engineers have already said, sorry, we don't have time. At that point, if you're able to go to that engineering leader and say, hey, we really need this, or make this a top priority in that voice of customer meeting for that CSM, I think that to me is an example of a great leader.
This has been really great. Our last question is, what do you think high performance companies do better than average performers in your experience?
I think high performance companies know how to empower their employees. They know how to make employees be creative. and not just be a complainer and think of themselves as an owner.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Jina. We appreciate
Thank
having
you.
you.
This was very fun.
Thanks so much for listening to Good Revenue. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the show, give us a rating, or leave us a review. It helps other listeners find us, and we really appreciate your support. You can also catch full videos and highlights on our YouTube channel.